we continue the conversation about immigration with our studio guests. They are Jennifer J. Lee from Clinical Associations, professors of law at Temple University, Scheller Center for Social Justice. And we also have Miguel Andrade, communications manager of Juntos, a community-led latex immigrant organization in South Philadelphia. Now, on June 25th, they released a report titled Interlocking Systems, How Pennsylvania Counties and Local Police Are Assisting ICE to Deport Immigrants. And we are excited to have you in the studio today and help us with this deep conversation. Thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having us.
So how did this report come about?
So the executive director of Juntos, Erica Almiron, had come to me, and we had had conversations about wanting to think a little bit about how collaboration was occurring between ICE and local governments. And in particular here in Philadelphia, we've been really successful, thanks to a lot of grassroots groups like Juntos, doing a lot of advocacy at the city level to get a lot of our sanctuary policies enacted here. That's not the case around the state. And so Erica was really interested, and in conjunction with a number of community-based organizations around the state, we started to have conversations about what sort of information would be useful for them to know about the collaboration between ICE and their local governments.
Yeah, I think it was also important to sort of like highlight that even though we are in the Northeast, like this is happening. This is an issue that does happen here in our state. And I think also because we do get calls from outside of Philadelphia of people who have been having these types of interactions. So I think it was also really important to sort of like nail down what is actually happening, like what are the actual policies or lack of policies that are allowing this collaboration to happen.
So was it the spark of the phone calls that kind of made you think like, wait a minute, people have questions?
I think it was a mixture of both. I think, yes, knowing that community members were sort of experiencing this stuff out there, but I think also, as Jen was saying earlier, I think being able to provide information and data for potential groups who are out there organizing so that they know what's actually happening. You kind of need to know what the lay of the land is if you're going to do any sort of organizing to try and pass sanctuary city policies like we did here in Philadelphia.
Now, I would like to hear both of your feedbacks on this one question. What was one of the most surprising things that you found out?
So maybe I'll go first.
Yeah.
So I think that the emails that we actually got from the Immigrant
Those
Legal
were
Resource
surprising.
Center, they are an immigrant advocacy organization out of California, and they have been battling with the federal government for years about getting FOIA information from the Department of Homeland Security. And so they've filed lawsuits, and as a result, they've gotten segments of information from the Department of Homeland Security. And they recently had gotten, when we had just started working on the report, some information pertaining to Pennsylvania. And what it was emails between probation officers and ICE. And these emails revealed not only extensive collaboration between probation officials and ICE, but even things that looked slightly like entrapment. So, for example, you're somebody who committed X crime, you've served your time, or maybe you were just sentenced to probation, and you want to abide by everything, right? So you want to come to your probation appointments, you want to check in. And what these probation officers were doing were sending emails and saying, hey, I need you to come in, and then coordinating to have ICE there to arrest them and take them. And I think that those were fairly shocking to me. And it wasn't just one county that we saw. We actually saw it occurring in a number of counties.
Yeah, I would say for myself, kind of echoing that, I think the level of sort of like wanting to sort of capture people, like, was really intense. I think also the sort of willingness or want from like local law enforcement to actually hand over information or collaborate with immigration. I think that was also very interesting, especially like I think it was Cambria County, like the sheriff over there, and his quote was essentially saying that like, you know, we're down to help with immigration, so if we encounter somebody, we're gonna like hand over their information. That was really surprising.
Okay. So being here in Pennsylvania and Philadelphia, We see all the attention being focused on the border, so some people were like, oh, it's the border, it's way over there. Can you connect the dots on how that affects Philadelphia?
Yeah, I mean, again, immigration is a nationwide issue. It doesn't just happen at the border. Again, that's why it was really important to publish this report, to like highlight that this is happening in our own backyard. And, you know, I mean, we also have, one of the findings in the report was that there's an increase in immigrant detention in Pennsylvania, right? So we have the Berks Family Detention Center right out of Philadelphia. We have York County Detention Center. We have this company, Vision Quest, who wants to open a child detention center here in the city, right? This is happening in our own backyard. It's not very far or distant. You don't have to go all the way down to the border to see what's actually happening.
Okay, so I just want to pinpoint that part where you're talking about, so the detention centers here, how are they getting into those detention centers? Are they grabbing local people? Are they bringing them from the border? Just because a lot of people are really not aware, you know, thinking this is kind of a distance, but it's really right here.
I would say it's a mixture. It's a mixture. With immigration detention, usually what happens is that you get picked up by ICE, and you kind of end up, there's a chance you'll end up getting placed anywhere in the country, honestly. So the local detention centers, I mean, Juntos just recently visited the York County Detention Center, like 2 hours away from Philadelphia. There were people there that got picked up at the border. There were people there that got picked up in Pennsylvania. There were people there from like New York, Connecticut. You kind of just end up being sent wherever there's space, honestly. That's kind of how immigration detention works.
And the family detention facility in Berks County especially is funneling in people, families that are coming at the border, and then putting them in their 2 family detention facilities in Texas, in Carnes and Dilley, and then the third one that exists in the country is here in Pennsylvania. So there are only 3 family detention centers. So if you're going to detain a family, those are your only 3 options within the United States. And then the other point that Miguel just raised, which I think is a really important one, is about how people are randomly placed in these detention centers and what kind of impact that has on families. So if your loved one gets picked up, you don't necessarily, it doesn't make sense where they're going to end up. You know, they're picked up in X county, you think they're going to be in the county jail facility that has a contract with ICE detention. That's not the case. They could be sent out of state. It's a very random system, and a lot of these facilities are located in really rural areas.
Middle of nowhere. Which
means that access to counsel is incredibly difficult, right? So it creates incredibly difficult barriers for people to be able to fight their cases.
Do they have enough bilingual interpreters, or are they able to communicate with them consistently when it comes to the detention centers?
I mean, each detention center is kind of different and has their own sort of sets of resources. But I mean, overall, the language access is a huge issue within immigration. And I feel like a lot of times, even when going into immigration proceedings, sometimes you'll just, the interpreter won't even be in the room. They're on the phone interpreting, like from thousands and thousands of miles away for an immigration detention case. And sometimes, and I've heard some of these calls, sometimes like the connection is like so bad you can't even understand what's actually being happening. And this is the process of like the immigration system and the courts that people are experiencing.
And I just want to echo Miguel's comment about, so under federal civil rights laws, the Department of Homeland Security is required under Title VI to have to provide access to interpreters, right, for court, for, you know, even services that are occurring within the detention center, et cetera. In the report, we profile a story of a Chinese man who had psychological issues and was essentially suicidal. And they kept, when they were having appointments with medical staff, they kept using, instead of getting an interpreter, so he spoke a dialect, I can't remember the precise language, but they found other inmates that had like Mandarin or Cantonese, like one of the main Chinese languages, but he spoke some dialect, and they kept using them as interpreters. And he ended up committing suicide. It's a story that's profiled in the report that's incredibly sad, but just an example of, you know, where language access, just like in the court proceedings, has an enormous impact.
Now, these contracts between local counties and ICE are lucrative. Can you explain how our tax dollars are supporting these systems?
I mean, so these are all federal contracts. So in the federal any sort of federal spending comes from taxpayers and taxes that individuals pay. And it's a lucrative business. The business of detaining immigrants is a billion-dollar industry, I would say. It's kind of hard to talk about like how exactly each of the dollars is kind of spent. But these are million dollar contracts that each county, I think our report said up to 24.
York County, which has the largest facility.
Yeah, $24 million. It's a contract between York County and ICE for their detention center.
And I think what's important to recognize here is that communities have made a different choice about detention. So in California, there's several counties where county officials and residents have said we don't want a detention contract. Texas, Virginia with the Juvenile Detention Center. There are counties that are organizing and saying we don't want to be making money off facilities that are holding people with civil rights and human rights abuses.
Yeah, I think it's also important to realize that this is just not immigration detention; it's incarceration in general. Like there's companies. The fact that there's for-profit companies that make billions of dollars off of incarcerating majority people of color, if we're being honest, is a widespread issue in this country.
Now, Miguel, in your press release, you said that you are hopeful local governments will consider how to use resources to not perpetuate immigrant detention. So how much power do the local counties actually have?
And in terms of keeping immigrant detention at a low or keeping ICE sort of contained a lot, I mean, look here in Philadelphia. I mean, yes, immigration detention and deportation still happen in Philadelphia, but there's a lot more protections for the immigrant community here locally than if you go outside the city into like Montgomery County or like Bucks County. The fact that that community fought for and won the sanctuary city policies here in Philadelphia that separate local police from ICE is huge, right? Because now people can actually interact with the local police system, especially if you're a victim or witness crimes. You don't have to fear that if you call the cops, you're going to end up being deported, which is what was the reality here in Philadelphia. So again, local counties and local government has a lot of power to be able to pass these kinds of policies that separate. Again, I think that was the crux of the report, being able to show that there's a lack of policies that actually separate these two agencies, and that it is up to elected officials to do so.
And the contracts for detention are directly with the county. So they're either with the county or they're with the county prison specifically. The documents are actually, if people are interested, they're on our website. The documents that we got through the right to know process here at the state level. And yeah, you can see the actual contract between the federal government and the county or the county prison. And so those specifically, the county absolutely has authority to end those contracts if they want to.
Now, have you seen any specific areas really given that government pushback?
In regards to
Local people.
So the immigrant organizing has been happening for years here in Pennsylvania, but I think we also need to remember that once you leave the two big cities like Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, it's very rural, it's very red, and it's really hard and difficult to do sort of community organizing in those areas. But I think having this report that shows some of this data is really important, because for those individuals who are there and want to do this work, you now have concrete proof of being like, this is an issue that's happening here and we're not going to stand for it.
Unfortunately, there are some people that don't want you to know, so they'll say, no, it's not happening, it's not happening. And then you see this report, like, no, it's right here, it's happening. Do you hear a lot of people saying that they're being told that this is not happening?
Yeah, I don't know if they're being told it's not happening, but I think it's people just not thinking about it, right? And not sort of thinking about the whole system and how intertwined the system is between local government and the federal government. Because it's not natural for us to think about local government doing the Fed's job, right? We think of local government providing local government services, policing communities for safety, right? We don't think of them as federal officials. And so I think that it's more that folks just never guessed that this was going on. And that's, I think, one of the things we wanted to accomplish with the report, was really to pull back the curtain and show people how intertwined these two systems are.
How interlocked they are.
The key word, interlocked. Talk to us about when people's like, no, we're a sanctuary city. Give us some insight on those who are thinking it's not happening here, it's a sanctuary city.
Yeah, so I have an interesting relationship with the term sanctuary city. One, there is no definition of what a sanctuary city is. So each sanctuary city that is out there, whatever policies they have that make them a quote unquote sanctuary city is different. Philadelphia is different than New York, different than Chicago, different than LA. So that's one. There's no clear definition. I think the other one is that the term sanctuary city kind of paints this idea that like we're a safe haven and nothing absolutely happens in terms of like immigrant detention in the city. That's absolutely false. Like we still get the calls every day at our office of people who have experienced detention that have no idea where their loved ones are, that they got picked up. Like this is still happening. I think what's important is that we need to, not only do we need to protect the sanctuary city policies that we have, but we need to continue to expand them, right? And we really need to redefine what sanctuary actually means. I think for me, if we're going to talk about a sanctuary city, that also means we have adequately funded schools. We stop racial profiling. We stop and frisk. We have healthcare for everybody. We have gender equality. Like that is true sanctuary. And until we actually have all of that, we can't really truly call ourselves that. And this idea that because we're in a sanctuary city or that sanctuary cities are safe havens, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. It is better than other areas that don't have these policies, but work still needs to happen.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's great. I mean, I think what Philadelphia and other sanctuary places are showing is they're showing their resistance to the federal model of enforcement and definitely signaling, I think, to immigrants and the immigrant community that you belong here and that you're a member of our society. And so I do think that those things are fantastic, but I definitely echo Miguel that it's not enough, right? I mean, we still have the feds conducting enforcement throughout the city, and in fact, we know that this administration has in fact targeted sanctuary cities at times for enforcement actions. And so it's certainly not enough, and we need to be thinking about what else we can be doing.
Okay. So I want you to think about two things each that is in that report that is a need to know to somebody that's watching. I know we can't go through the whole report, but just think about two things each that is definitely a need to know that we can share with our viewers.
I mean, I think for me, it's really just the anecdotal pieces that are in the report, sort of like the email conversations, the phone conversations, the back and forth of communication that actually happens within local law enforcement and immigration. I think that is one of the biggest takeaways of the report. If you read anything in the report, I would highly suggest looking at that. I actually do encourage everybody. It's not that long of a report. It's 44 pages.
There are a lot of footnotes, but you don't have to read those. So.
I do encourage everybody to actually go to either of our organization's websites to read the full report, but that would be my takeaway, I think. The anecdotal conversations between local law enforcement and federal immigration agents.
Yeah, and for me, I mean, it's sort of hard to choose, but one thing that sticks out to me, given the current conversation that's going on, is the detention section of the report.
Yes. Oh, yes.
I mean, we're talking about detaining kids at the border. We're talking about a detention center opening up here in Philly, Vision Quest, for kids. Why are we detaining people? And just be mindful that this detention is for civil immigration violations, right? So a lot of times people might be leaving the criminal justice system, but they've already served their time. And so we're putting them in prisons. And at times, folks are there, especially if you're going to fight your case. Lots of people end up not fighting their case because they don't want to be in those conditions. So they just end up signing some paper sort of accepting and withdrawing their case. But if you fight your case, you can be in detention for 9 months, 12 months,
years.
More time than that. And just really, I think people are beginning to really question why we have this whole system, and Miguel alluded to sort of the profit structure of the system, but I think that the detention part of the report really nicely lays out how folks are profiting off of it and how it's incredibly problematic.
And how it's increasing. I think that's the other important part of the report.
Gotcha. Before we wrap up, if someone wants to get involved that has a concern, how could they do that?
Sure. So for Juntos, people are more than welcome to call our office, 215-218-9079, or shoot us an email, Vamos Juntos, VAMOSJUNTOS.org, or hit us up in any of our social medias. There's multiple ways to get in contact and get involved.
And I'll stick, just because we're an academic institution, I don't know that there's as much for outside folks to get involved, but I would, again, absolutely encourage that they contact Juntos. There are other immigrant rights organizations in the city as well that, I think would be happy to hear from folks who maybe have some volunteer spirit. Right?
And absolutely mobilize whenever there's a need to. I think be on the lookout for a call to action. Like we had our demonstration in front of ICE that was kind of last minute, and a couple hundred people showed up, like 200 people. We need people to be, if you're outraged about what's happening in this country, you need to hit the streets.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. That is all the time we have for this episode for PhillyCAM Voices. Thank you for tuning in. Make sure you follow us on all social media outlets, and see you next time.